Hello team and welcome back to the What Life. I hate to do this to you, but we are diving straight back in to the same race that we did on Monday night. But instead it's Thursday late morning. It's 11 a.m. UTC or 11 a.m. in the UK. I thought I'd try and find a race that isn't quite so hot, that doesn't have quite so many people. So we're doing the coastal route again, going coastal, part of the new course that's recently been added to Zwift. This time, instead of being 150 people, there are 50 people. Now, this is still quite a big race. I was actually trying to find a race with, like 20 odd people, but this was kind of the only one that I could find that didn't have tons and tons of people. So obviously, everyone's just diving back into Zwift season. Off the start line, you'll see that it kind of gets a little bit hairy straight away, but it dies down. So some stats about the course itself. As mentioned, it's just over 11 miles, 18 kilometers. Not a huge amount of elevation if you haven't ridden this before, and most of the elevation is on the second half of the course. So effectively, once we get into the new area that is unlocked in Zwift. Now, I found this really interesting, guys. I rode this with 1 watt difference to Monday night, okay? So my average wattage on Monday night was 279. My average wattage for today was 200. Let me do that again. My average wattage on Monday night was 287. And my average wattage today was 286. So interestingly, it was almost, in terms of averages, identical. A lot of my 1 minute, my 30 seconds, and my 5 minutes, and my 20 minutes are all pretty much bang on the same. Yet this race, we end up being a minute slower. And obviously, the drafting and everything that kind of factors in. So just think it's really interesting that you can get the same result from effectively two completely different styles of racing. Well, not the same result, but two completely different styles of racing with the same wattage yield very different results. I think that's what I'm trying to say. So that was crazy. That was interesting. So I loved this one. This was really interesting. This kind of takes me back to when I was riding in Cat C and there was more race dynamics, because slightly less people, it creates more of a dynamic. Usually I'm just like trying to hang on to a group, but this was very different. This became like a much more enjoyable style of racing. And actually, guys, I really, really loved it, because there was things like little breakaways, little bridges, all the little nuances to racing that I haven't really been able to participate in, because all I'm trying to do is hold the back wheel of a massive front group during a primetime race. This one ends up being very, very different, and we'll dive into it in a second. Just to say that we had a few guys share some messages, and also guys, I do this because I love it. Like, I just want to get better. My main focus is just improving as a cyclist and enjoying it and having fun with it. I throw a few comments in the chat during this race. That's not because I think I'm necessarily kind of any better than I am. Well, maybe perhaps we're all a little bit guilty of thinking we are the rider that we're hoping to be in 3-4 weeks. So I just really enjoy racing, and I love throwing like the cat amongst the pigeons. So you will see in a second, once we get rolling into the course, I just kind of throw a little. I do think about it. I think long and hard about actually saying anything. But basically, the pace comes off here. You can see the pace has kind of died right down, and I'm like, okay, well, we're 200 watts. We're not really pushing hard. Granted, I am not at the front of the group. I'm very much kind of sat at the back. But, I basically kind of think twice. And then I do dive in the chat and just say, are we going to the shops? God, I regret doing these things. I don't know why I do it. Like, I regret doing these things. Ultimately, I was just saying that it felt a bit slow for a B race, and I only do it because I love making these things more interesting. If the whole ride was just all of us kind of sat there just holding a casual wattage and it comes down to a sprint at the end, I just don't think it makes for kind of particularly interesting races. Obviously, as soon as I say something like that, you do rile things up a little bit, and then I think some of the guys take it personally, and then we start getting underway, and this is when I start loving it. Just to take it back, guys, just think, I get 1 watt difference on an average between Monday nights and tonight's race. But tonight's race, from a heart rate perspective, or today's race, sorry, I was like 5 beats average lower. So it's starting to feel a bit more comfortable. I'm starting to get kind of more I don't know, just more maybe efficient with it, and my positioning felt a little bit better on Monday, and this one was just a slightly different style, and it becomes more about the actual racing, whereas sometimes I'm just trying to hold on. Today came about like sitting in groups, trying to make bridges, like all the fun stuff that I have really enjoyed about diving into races. So obviously I threw the cat amongst the pigeons. You can immediately see that some of the guys use that as an opportunity to start riding off the front, and then we start breaking the group up, and the fun begins. This is what I love about racing, just trying to kind of see which groups you have to go with, and making those little decisions are the things that I just like. I find it so much more interesting. We aren't a massive big group just moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour where you can't get little breakaways and things can't change. When the groups are slightly smaller, there's just more dynamic to it, and that's kind of why I was trying to hunt out a smaller race, because I thought it'd be a bit more interesting from a racing perspective, rather than sometimes effectively those big 100 people or 150 people races sometimes just feel like a TT. Like you just got to hold on, put out as much watts as you can, and just stay in the group or don't fall off the group. This one was slightly different. And there are a few instances coming up that you will see where it's just tons of bridging and not bridging. So at the moment you've got two guys who are riding off the front of the race, and this is actually quite funny, because I'm kind of sat there putting in my watts, enjoying it, having fun. Pace has changed, quite enjoying it. I then look up and I see that there are a couple of guys riding off the front of this group, and I was like, okay, well, the way that we're riding at the moment, things are quite relaxed. I'll just put a message in the group just saying that's great riding from the guys at the front. So I picked my phone up to write this message out, and I think that was somehow the moment that everyone realized that these guys were riding off the front, and then the group just takes off. And I'm like, oh damn, like so I've sent this message being like, oh, that's really good riding from the guys who have ridden off the front of the group, without realizing that whilst I'm looking at my phone writing out this message, the group just kind of stomps on a pedal and dives off into the distance, and I'm like, oh crap. So phone goes down, and I have to kind of focus up, get back into it, and it becomes like a bit of a kick. And this is quite interesting, because ultimately, there was 2, maybe 3 guys off the front, and they'd spoken about, you could see them in the chat being like, hey, should we rotate? Even with 3 guys off the front and a chasing pack of 50 cyclists on a dead flat course, they would have to ride so well to stay away and stay ahead of our 50-person group. But someone leads the charge on basically bridging this group up to those 2 cyclists, which was great. Really strong move, really great move. I admire it, I like it. I had to then work a little bit harder because I got caught out by it, because I was doing dumb things like writing messages in the chat, and I kind of almost missed it. But again, it doesn't necessarily split the entire group, because it's dead flat and there's enough people, but it does bring the guys who had ridden off the front back in. So we're about to get into the fun part of the race, which is the second part of the course, and everyone so far should be really familiar. Obviously, I dive in the chat and just say a cheeky thank you to the guys that did the bridge work on that. And this is this is an interesting race, because a lot of it comes about bridging, a lot of it comes about failed bridges and people that do make bridges and kind of solo bridge efforts and stuff like that, which is that I just loved it. Like this is the side of Zwift racing that I absolutely love, which is these little moments where you kind of have to make a decision, commit to it, and hold it. And sometimes your opportunity moves away from you as the group, kind of just a little bit too far ahead for a bridge. So we're moving into the second half of the race. You might notice that after riding Monday night's race, I didn't bother using my power up on the first half, knowing how flat it was. I always knew that the group was going to come back together, so I deliberately decided that I was going to try and save it for the second half that becomes a bit more rolly. So second half of this race, it's just under half the race, is all a little bit more rolly, and this is kind of entirely where all the elevation, and that's in inverted commas, guys, there's no elevation in the route whatsoever, but it is rolly. There's a couple of 3-4% rollers in there, and this is where things start getting a little bit naughty, and I start liking it. So we get this first little climb. The group looks pretty solid. We start putting on the watts, and I think my timing when it comes to using power-ups was pretty good, like absolutely no qualms with that whatsoever. But I do think that I struggled a little bit, just kind of putting the watts down when I actually needed them. And just to recap, same, almost exactly the same wattage from Monday night as tonight's. So that kind of does. I was kind of on the limit of what I am personally capable of doing. Just some guys rode this really well. But this is where it gets quite interesting. Because what we get is a few guys who take the kind of bit in their mouth, like bit in the teeth, and they just kind of kick on a little bit. And this was the great thing about this race. This is undoubtedly the best part of this race. Because what happens is that these guys, and there aren't a huge amount of them, 5 or 6 of them, create that break. I kind of half see it, and hand in the air, not quite good enough to make the bridge or stay with anyone, and it's dribs and drabs that are trying to bridge. And I've been really trying to work to stay in. My positioning's not bad, but you can see now that there is like a definitive break, right? Like there is a definite break in the group. Now, interestingly, watch some of the guys who try and make the bridge, because not everyone who goes for the bridge makes the bridge, which effectively just means that they are absolutely gassing themselves out. So you've got that small little group up front, and a few guys kind of really commit to trying to just cross over. 100%, this was the right move. Like anyone that went for it, 100% the right move, because you're on the incline. It's probably your best chance to catch them. A couple of guys use power-ups. Anyone that did make the bridge here, you guys are the heroes. You're the heroes of this race, because you are the ones that succeed. But a few guys go for it and don't make it, and I feel like obviously, like you've got to feel for them when things like that happen. I think a few more of us probably should have committed to going with it, and that would have changed certainly our race, and maybe kept our little chase group a bit more in the mix. Obviously, in the mini-map, you can see that a few people are obviously dropping off the back. So we're losing people in the main group. We're losing people at the bulk of the group. The front group has split. We've got our little chase group, and some of our chase group, look, are trying to make the bridge, but they don't quite make it. And God, you got to feel for them, because they really did work hard. And we end up bringing in some of the guys that are on that bridge attempt. Like how kind of demoralizing is it to kind of put in that bridge effort, get within spitting distance almost. You can throw a water bottle at these guys, but you can't quite get on their wheel. That's a bit of a killer. So you've now effectively, kudos to the guys up front. They've created that front group. They've done really well. There's enough of them there relative to our group that means that they can hold that gap now. Again, another climb, a power up, and a few guys just go for this bridge effort. So this is what this race actually turned into, was basically our little chase group desperately trying to kind of catch on and catch up with the front group, who were obviously some strong riders up the front. Had a quick look at the Zwift power and guys that win. I saw that Will, who was dropping a few messages in the chat during the race, has got a phenomenal 15-second punch on him, like another 99-second punch. Also, as a side note, guys, my punch on Zwift power is actually going down. So I like to think of that because of my average wattage going up, if that makes sense. Like I haven't quite got the punch in me just yet. So that's it. Like our front group, our little chase group, just can't quite catch or bridge. A few guys make the attempts, and then ultimately the guys at the front were just riding incredibly well. I thought you guys did a really good job of I'm not even sure whether they probably weren't paying any attention to us as a chase group whatsoever, but they just, they stayed on it. They kind of kept their foot down, and it just meant that we were just almost within touching different distance, but we couldn't do it. I think maybe if we'd worked as a group a little bit more, that might have enabled us to get back up. But no, I think it would have taken like a really strong rider in our little chase group to kind of commit to the bridge, and then a few of us to go with it for it to actually happen. Then we could have used one another's wheels to kind of really make that a thing, but it didn't quite happen. And if you look at my watts, kind of my wattage at the bottom of the screen, the power zones, you'll see that it's a series of basically little rollers where we're having to put the watts in, or try and hold on. And then I just didn't have ultimately the legs once I'd kind of tried to put as many watts on as possible to bridge. So I'm as guilty as anyone else. Like I kind of think I didn't really try and commit to a bridge because I just knew that I probably didn't have it in me, and it would have, like, you know, you're in half a mind, right? You're in half a mind, which is, should I go for this bridge and then once I make the group just sit there and recover? But also, like, if I go for the bridge and I don't make it and I have to drop back, am I going to get dropped from my chase group? That's kind of what was going through my head. Right, so we're at the end of the race, guys, and we are coming into effectively my sprint finish. Yay! So, you know, it's something that I've kind of been focusing on a little bit, which is like, don't be soft at the finish. Now that you're looking to improve, now you're looking to be a better rider, just try and commit to these sprint finishes. So two guys do it quite well. They pick up quite early on that if they just kind of drop a few more watts, they can kind of ride off the front. So well done, you guys. That was a good shout. And they put their watts in early and just create a big group, like a big gap, or enough of a gap. I'm obviously quite gassed, so, you know, we're all building our wattage quite comfortably, but then I decide, right, as usual, just pick your point and just go for it. So, you know, couple of gear changes, hands down on the drops. I kind of have a look at the screen and realize that, you know, there's maybe 5 or 6 guys that we're kind of racing against. So let's go for it. And sorry guys about the panting. But we go full on, and I commit to it. I think my heart rate touches 172 at the end of it. So that's, you know, again, another positive. I feel like, I mean, did anyone see 900 watts come up on the screen? I feel like I got quite close to it, maybe top 800s. But it's a fairly reasonable sprint, and I'm pretty happy with it again. That is definitely coming on. A few things, I do manage to pick up a 20-minute power curve PR, number one. And number two is, after doing an FTP test yesterday, Zwift now tells me that my FTP has improved as a consequence of this race.